People think betrayal comes loud, yelling, slamming doors, big ugly scenes where everyone knows exactly when something breaks. They're wrong. Sometimes betrayal is quiet. Sometimes it sounds like a laugh you weren't meant to hear. Sometimes it's a sentence said too casually by someone who thinks you're already invisible. Dear listeners, before we start, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. It reminds me I'm not alone telling this story. And if you enjoy it, hit like and subscribe. It really means a lot. Now, let me take you back. I was 61 years old when I learned what my son-in-law really thought of me. And the worst part? He said it in my own house. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there holding my breath, realizing that the life I thought I still had already been written off by someone else. Let me take you back. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day nobody remembers unless something goes wrong. The sky was that dull Midwestern gray, not stormy, just tired. My knees were aching the way they do when rain's coming, and I was moving slower than I used to, but I'd gotten used to that. You don't fight time, you learn how to walk alongside it. I was carrying a basket of clean laundry down the hallway of the house I'd lived in for 23 years. My house, the house I bought after my husband died, the house I paid off early by working double shifts at the clinic. The house where my daughter grew up, slammed doors, cried over boys, and eventually walked down the aisle. The same house my son-in-law now walked through like he owned it. Their bedroom door was half closed. I wasn't trying to listen, I swear that on everything. But when you hear your name, your real name, not Mom or Mrs., your body reacts before your mind does. I stopped. My son-in-law's voice floated down the hallway, low and smug. I mean, what are we even doing with her? I froze. My heart didn't race, it sank. That's how you know it's bad, when your body already understands before you do. My daughter laughed softly. The sound hit me harder than his words. He continued, "She's dead weight, babe. No offense, but seriously, 61, no job, bad knees. How long do you think before we're the ones taking care of her?" Dead weight. The word landed in my chest like a brick. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, the laundry basket slipping just a little in my grip. My daughter didn't defend me. She sighed. I know, I just don't know how to say it without hurting her. Hurting me? As if what they were doing wasn't already tearing me apart? I stood there long enough to hear him say, "We can't build our future dragging her past behind us." Then I quietly stepped back into the kitchen, every movement slow, controlled, deliberate. They never knew I was listening, and I never let them know it. Not then. I raised my daughter alone after her father passed. No backup, no safety net, just me, grief, and a little girl who needed stability when I was barely holding myself together. I skipped meals so she could eat, worked holidays so she could have birthdays, told myself I didn't mind being tired because tired meant she was okay. When she brought him home for the first time, my future son-in-law, I wanted to like him, I really did. He had that smooth confidence, firm handshake, too white smile, the kind of man who talks about goals and grind like life's a business deal. He called me ma'am at first, then Mabel, then barely anything at all. After they got married, things shifted fast. Suddenly, decisions were, we'll talk about it later. Suggestions were old school thinking. My opinions became background noise. When my knees started acting up and I had to quit my job at the clinic, he framed it like concern. Maybe it's time you slowed down. What he meant was, step aside. They moved into my house temporarily. That was 2 years ago. After I heard those words, dead weight, something inside me went quiet. Not broken, quiet. I cooked dinner that night like nothing happened, set the table, asked about their day. I watched him eat the food I paid for, sitting in the chair I bought, under the roof I still legally owned, and he didn't look at me once. That's when I realized something most women my age learn too late. People don't start disrespecting you overnight. They practice, slowly, until it feels normal. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I'd ignored, every joke that landed wrong, every time my daughter spoke over me, every time he corrected me like I was a child. I wasn't dead weight. I was being pushed. And the scariest part? They thought I was too weak to notice. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, not from pain, from clarity. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked around the house like I was seeing it for the first time. And I asked myself one question: when did my life stop being mine? That's when I started planning, quietly, carefully, patiently. Because if there's one thing you learn by 61, it's that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. After that morning at the kitchen table, I didn't suddenly become brave. I didn't wake up with a speech prepared or a suitcase packed. What I woke up with was awareness, and that's a dangerous thing for people who benefit from your silence. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see, like how my son-in-law had slowly taken over the house without ever asking. The thermostat stayed where he liked it, even though my joints screamed when the cold settled in. The TV stayed locked on his shows. My chair, the one by the window where I used to read in the afternoons, became his spot. If I sat there, he'd hover, not rudely, just long enough to make me uncomfortable. So eventually, I stopped sitting there. That's how control works. Nobody announces it. They just make it easier for you to disappear than to resist. A week after I heard him call me dead weight, I found an envelope on the counter. My name was written on it, not in my daughter's handwriting, his. Inside was a typed list, not a letter, not a conversation starter, a list. Utilities contribution, grocery expenses, future planning considerations. At the bottom, a neat little total. I stared at it for a long time, my coffee going cold in my hands. I had paid every bill in that house for years. Even after they moved in, I covered most of it. Property taxes, repairs, insurance, things he never asked about because they weren't visible. When I finally looked up, he was standing in the doorway like he'd been waiting for me to finish reading. "We just think it's fair," he said, calm, businesslike. "You know, everyone pulling their weight." Pulling their weight. I looked past him at my daughter, who was scrolling on her phone, not meeting my eyes. "I'm on a fixed income," I said quietly. "You know that." He shrugged. "Then maybe it's time to rethink the living arrangement." There it was, the thread without teeth marks. I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That seemed to satisfy him. What he didn't know was that I already was. That afternoon, I drove to the bank. I hadn't been in months, not because I couldn't, but because he'd started helping with finances, setting things up online, explaining apps, telling me it was easier if he handled it. I used to thank him. God, that makes me sick now. The teller recognized me right away. "Mabel, haven't seen you in a while," she said warmly. I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel forced. We sat down. I asked for printed statements, old ones, the kind that don't disappear with a password. As pages stacked up in front of me, my stomach tightened. There were transfers I didn't remember approving, small amounts at first, then larger ones, always labeled something harmless, household adjustment, shared expense. Shared, that word again. I didn't say anything. I just thanked her, folded the papers into my purse, and walked out feeling like the ground beneath me wasn't solid anymore. That night, my daughter finally spoke to me. Not kindly, not cruelly either, just distant. "Mom," she said, arms crossed, leaning against the counter, "you have to understand where he's coming from." I waited. "We're trying to build something, a future, and sometimes it feels like you're stuck." Stuck, another word people use when they mean in the way. "I raised you alone," I said softly. "I worked my whole life." "I know," she replied quickly, too quickly, "and we're grateful, but you can't expect things to stay the same forever." I looked at her, really looked, at the woman I used to braid hair for, the girl who slept beside me after nightmares, the daughter who once said, "I'll never leave you alone, Mom." She couldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized the truth. She wasn't choosing him over me. She was choosing comfort over confrontation, and I was the price. The days after that were heavy. Every conversation felt loaded, every silence louder. I started keeping my purse close, my papers organized, my emotions locked down. I listened more than I spoke, and the more I listened, the uglier things became. I heard him joke to a friend on speakerphone about inheriting the place eventually. He laughed. "Yeah, it's basically ours already." I stood in the hallway, heart pounding, and thought, "You have no idea." One evening while they were out, I went into the guest room closet. That's where I kept the lockbox. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years. The deed, the original will, insurance policies, everything still in my name, everything still mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, papers spread out like proof of existence. For the first time since my husband died, I cried. Not loud, not messy, just steady tears for the woman I'd allowed myself to become, quiet, shrinking, grateful for scraps. When I finished, I wiped my face and made a decision. I wasn't going to fight loud, I was going to fight smart. The next morning, I started making changes, small ones, invisible ones. I opened a new account at a different bank, redirected my deposits, canceled shared access. I didn't tell anyone. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, a woman close to my age who looked at me like I mattered. When I told her everything, she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You're not trapped, Mabel. You're just being pressured to forget that you have options." That sentence stayed with me. At home, my son-in-law grew bolder. He criticized my cooking, corrected how I spoke, reminded me casually how expensive things were. And every time I nodded, every time I smiled, because confidence looks a lot like arrogance right before it collapses. One night as I passed the living room, I heard him say it again, "She's slowing us down." Dead weight. This time, I didn't flinch. I walked past like I hadn't heard a thing, but inside, I was already lifting myself free. People think strength looks like shouting. They imagine slammed fists, dramatic ultimatums, suitcases dragged across floors. But real strength? Real strength is restraint. It's sitting at your own kitchen table, listening to someone plan a future that doesn't include you, and choosing not to react yet. By the time I met with the lawyer a second time, I had stopped shaking. Not because things were better, because I was done pretending I didn't understand what was happening. She slid a yellow legal pad across the desk and said, "Let's talk about your end game." That word, end game, made something click in my head. I'd spent years just surviving, reacting, adjusting, softening myself so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to think ahead. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want my life back." She nodded. "Good, because revenge burns fast, control lasts." Back at home, the atmosphere shifted, not because anyone else noticed, but because I did. Once you stop fearing the worst, people lose their leverage. I noticed how my son-in-law spoke to me when my daughter wasn't around, sharper, shorter, less pretending. One afternoon, I asked if he could help carry a box from the garage. He sighed like I'd asked him to donate a kidney. "You really should start thinking about downsizing. This place is a lot for you." A lot for me, not for the man who didn't pay the mortgage, not for the couple who treated it like a launch pad, just me. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied. He smirked, already convinced he was winning. The first real crack came over dinner. We were eating spaghetti, cheap, easy, familiar. I'd made it 100 times. Halfway through, he set his fork down and said, "So, we've been talking." I waited. "We think it might be time to set a timeline, for transitions." Transitions. Another soft word hiding a hard truth. My daughter stared into her plate. "What kind of timeline?" I asked. "Well," he said, leaning back, "maybe 6 months gives everyone time to prepare." Prepare for what? Being displaced from my own life? I looked at my daughter. "And you agree with this?" She hesitated. That pause told me everything. "I just think," she said carefully, "that it might be good for you to explore options." "Options?" I smiled. "That sounds reasonable," I said. The relief on his face was instant, and that's when I knew they had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. That night I didn't sleep, not because I was scared, but because my mind wouldn't stop organizing. I made lists in my head, things I needed, things I didn't, people I trusted, which was a shorter list than I liked. I remembered something my mother used to say: never announce your departure before you're ready to leave. She was right. Over the next few weeks, I became invisible again, but this time on purpose. I stopped offering opinions, stopped reacting to jabs, stopped explaining myself. I played the role they expected: quiet, compliant, aging. Inside, I was reclaiming ground inch by inch. I transferred documents to a secure folder, updated beneficiaries, revised the will. I made sure everything reflected reality, not sentiment. And when the lawyer asked, "Are you sure?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." My son-in-law started getting impatient. Control makes people sloppy. He pushed harder, criticized more openly, spoke about me like I wasn't in the room. "She forgets things," he told my daughter, right in front of me. "It's concerning." I set my teacup down slowly. "I heard that," I said. He blinked, surprised. "Good, then we're clear." That shut him up for about 5 minutes. The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon. They were having friends over. I hadn't been told, just walked into a full living room like I was the guest. One of the women smiled awkwardly and asked, "Oh, are you Mabel's mom?" I laughed. "No," I said, "I'm Mabel." The room went quiet. My son-in-law cleared his throat. "She's joking." I wasn't. Later, in the kitchen, I confronted my daughter. "Is this how you see me now? Background?" She snapped back, defensive. "You're being sensitive." Sensitive, the word people use when they don't want to be accountable. "I heard him call me dead weight," I said calmly. Her face drained of color. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she whispered. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "he was wrong," just, "you weren't supposed to know." That hurt more than the insult ever could. That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave, to remind myself I could. I placed it in the closet where I'd see it every morning, a quiet promise. The next week, I received a call. It was from the clinic where I used to work. They needed part-time help, temporary, nothing glamorous, but it was mine. When I told my daughter, she looked confused. "You don't have to do that," she said. I smiled. "I want to." My son-in-law frowned. It was the first time he looked unsure. Something shifted after that. I had my own schedule, my own income, my own momentum, and people who rely on you being weak hate when you start standing up. He became colder, short-tempered. One night I overheard him whisper, "She's getting ideas." He wasn't right. I stood in my room later looking at the lockbox one last time before moving it somewhere safer. Inside were papers, yes, but also something else. Proof. Proof that I wasn't disposable. Proof that I hadn't wasted my life. Proof that when the moment came, and it would come, I wouldn't be begging, I'd be deciding. There's a moment in every woman's life when she realizes she's done asking for permission. Not done being polite, not done being kind, done shrinking. For me, that moment didn't come with fireworks. It came on a Friday afternoon, standing in my own living room, listening to my son-in-law explain my life to strangers like I was already gone. They were hosting a small get-together, his idea. Just networking, he'd said. Good energy, forward-thinking people. Translation, people like him. I hadn't been invited, but I hadn't been excluded either. I was just assumed. Assumed to stay in my room, assumed to stay quiet, assumed to stay out of the way. I stayed in the kitchen at first, pretending to organize cabinets that were already clean. I could hear laughter drifting in, loud, careless laughter from people who didn't know the history of that house, didn't know I scrubbed blood out of those floors after my husband collapsed, didn't know I cried into those walls after bills I didn't know how I'd pay, didn't know I survived there. Then I heard my name again. I mean, technically it's her house, my son-in-law said, his voice smooth and confident, but we're handling most of the responsibilities now. Someone chuckled. Someone else said, "That's generous of you." Generous. I stepped into the doorway before I could talk myself out of it. The room froze. 6 people, drinks in hand, smiles halfway to their faces. My daughter stiffened when she saw me. "Oh, Mom," she said. "Did you need something?" Need something, like I was interrupting. "I live here," I said calmly, "just saying hello." There was an awkward wave of greetings, introductions made without context. "This is Mabel. She's family." He stood up, slow, deliberate. "Mabel was just telling me earlier she's thinking about next steps," he said, smiling too wide. "You know, simplifying things." I stared at him. I hadn't said that, but he was used to rewriting me. I smiled back. "Actually," I said, "I was thinking about ownership." Silence. He blinked. "Ownership?" "Yes," I said, "you know, of my house." The air shifted. You could feel it, that uncomfortable energy when someone realizes a story might not be true. My daughter jumped in fast. "Mom, this isn't the time." "No," I said gently, "it's fine." I turned to the guests. "I bought this house myself, paid it off early, been living here over 20 years. Someone nodded slowly. Someone else looked at him, not me. He laughed, too quick. "Of course," he said, "but we're talking long term." Long term is a conversation, not an assumption. I excused myself then, quiet, controlled, but I saw it, the first crack. That night the argument came, not loud at first, tight voices, closed doors, accusations disguised as concern. He accused me of embarrassing him. I accused him of overstepping. My daughter stood between us like a referee who didn't want to call the game. "You don't understand how this looks," he snapped. I folded my arms. "How does it look?" "Like you don't trust us." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You call me dead weight. Why would I trust you?" My daughter gasped. "You promised you wouldn't bring that up." Promised? I hadn't promised anything. I didn't mishear it, and I didn't imagine it. He didn't deny it. That told me more than any apology could have. After that, the house went cold. Not quiet, cold. He stopped speaking to me unless necessary. My daughter became clipped, distracted. I was no longer just inconvenient. I was unpredictable, and unpredictability scares people who crave control. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a letter. Typed, formal. It suggested alternative living arrangements, senior housing options, budget outlines. No threats, just pressure, just the slow attempt to push me somewhere smaller. I read it twice, then I folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope, and I smiled, because by then I was already ahead of them. The lawyer confirmed everything. She said, "They can't force you out, and they definitely can't make decisions for you." "What if they try?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Then you stop playing nice." That night I did something I should have done years ago. I changed the locks on my bedroom door. Not the house, just my space. The look on my son-in-law's face when he noticed, priceless. "What's this?" he demanded. "Privacy," I replied. "Highly recommend it." He scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I replied. "I'm being prepared." A few days later, my daughter sat on my bed, awkward like a visitor. "He feels like you're shutting us out," she said. I looked at her. "Do you know what it feels like," I asked quietly, "to be talked about like you're already dead?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she still didn't say he was wrong, and that was the moment something in me finally let go. The family dinner was the next turning point. Everyone was there, cousins, an aunt I hadn't seen in years, people who remembered me before I became background noise. He was charming, helpful, the perfect son-in-law, until he slipped. Someone joked about how fast the house market was moving. He laughed and said, "Yeah, we're hoping to make a move soon." I set my fork down. "We?" I asked. He froze. "I'm not moving," I said calmly, "and this house isn't for sale." The table went dead silent. My aunt blinked. "I thought this was your house, Mabel." "It is, still." My son-in-law's face flushed. My daughter stared at her plate, and that's when everyone finally saw it, the truth. Later that night, he cornered me in the hallway. "You're doing this on purpose," he hissed. I didn't raise my voice. "Yes," I said. He stared at me like a stranger. Maybe I was. I lay in bed that night, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something else, relief, because once the mask slips, it never goes back on the same way. And now, everyone was watching. Once the truth is spoken out loud, it doesn't echo. It settles. It sinks into the walls, into the furniture, into the spaces where lies used to live comfortably. After that family dinner, my house didn't feel the same anymore. Not to them. To me, it felt clearer than it had in years. They couldn't pretend now. They couldn't reframe it as misunderstanding. Too many people had seen the pause. Too many people had felt the tension. And the thing about silence after exposure, it's loud. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee like I always did. But for the first time in months, no one else came into the kitchen. No footsteps, no fridge opening, no casual takeover of space. They stayed in their room. I sat at the table alone, hands wrapped around my mug, staring out the window. I wasn't sad. I was steady. That scared them more than tears ever could. By the third day, my son-in-law broke. Not emotionally, strategically. He started being nice again. Too nice. He offered to pick up groceries, asked if I needed anything, even called me Mabel with a softness that hadn't been there before. People like him don't apologize. They rebrand. I thanked him politely and kept my distance. I'd learned the difference. The lawyer called that afternoon. "I've drafted the documents," she said. "Once you sign, everything changes." Everything. I went to her office after work. The clinic had already started calling me essential, and that word felt different this time. I sat down, read every line, and signed my name slowly. Each letter felt like reclaiming something that had been taken quietly. When I was done, she looked at me and said, "This is going to upset them." I smiled faintly. They've been upsetting me for years. When I got home, the house was too quiet. My daughter was sitting on the couch, knees pulled up, eyes red. "He knows," she said before I could speak. I nodded. "Good." She looked at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. "When did you become like this?" Like what? Aware? Unmanageable? Unwilling to disappear? "I didn't become anything," I said gently. "I stopped pretending." Her voice cracked. "You're tearing this family apart." That one hurt, because for years I had been the glue, the one who softened edges, the one who absorbed damage, and now I was being blamed for finally letting go. He came in an hour later, didn't take off his jacket, didn't sit. "He needs to talk," he said. "No. You need to listen." He stiffened. "I've updated my will," I said calmly, "and I've set a timeline." His jaw tightened. "A timeline for what?" "For you to move out." There it was, the line they never thought I'd draw. My daughter stood up fast. "Mom!" "No," I said, not raising my voice. "I've listened long enough." He laughed, but there was panic underneath it. "You can't just do that." I already did. That night was ugly. Accusations flew. Voices rose. He said I was selfish. He said I was bitter. He said I was trying to control my daughter. I let him talk, because the louder he got, the smaller he looked. Eventually, he said it again, the word, dead weight, this time in front of her. The room went silent, and for the very first, my daughter didn't defend him. She just stared. That was the moment everything shifted. Not for him, for her. She cried that night in my room like she used to when she was little, said she didn't know how things got so bad, said she felt trapped. I held her because I'm still her mother, but I didn't take responsibility for her choices anymore. Love doesn't mean sacrifice without end. 2 weeks later, they moved out. Not gracefully, not quietly, but they moved. Boxes scraped against floors, doors slammed, words were said that can't be taken back. I stood in the hallway and watched, not smug, just resolved. When the door finally closed, the house exhaled. So did I. The aftermath wasn't instant peace. It was emptiness. Rooms felt larger, silence deeper, but it was mine again. I walked through each room slowly, touching walls like they were old friends. I hadn't lost my home. I'd reclaimed it. A month later, I received a message from him, short, bitter. You didn't have to do it like that. I didn't reply, because the truth is, I didn't do it to him. I did it for me. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea. The air was cool, the stars steady. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for my life to start again. It already had. People think the hardest part is when someone leaves your house. It's not. The hardest part is what happens after, when the noise is gone and you're left alone with the truth. Not just about them, but about yourself. The morning after they moved out, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel proud. I felt exposed, like I'd ripped open a wall that had been hiding rot for years, and now the house was standing there, honest and bare, waiting to see what I'd do next. I stood in the hallway in my robe, staring at the scuff marks where their boxes had scraped the paint. For years, I'd tiptoed around that hallway, measured my steps, held my breath. Now I walked it slowly, deliberately, barefoot on the cool floor. Each step felt like claiming territory. I wish I could tell you the silence felt peaceful right away. It didn't. At first, it was unsettling. No slammed doors, no low voices behind closed rooms, no tension buzzing under every conversation, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. I caught myself listening for sounds that weren't coming anymore. That's what living under pressure does to you. It trains your body to stay alert even when the danger's gone. I made coffee and sat at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. For years, I'd sat there feeling small. That morning, I sat there feeling unfinished. Grief doesn't always come when someone dies. Sometimes it comes when you realize how much of yourself you gave away trying to keep the peace. I grieved the version of me who smiled through disrespect, the woman who apologized for existing, the mother who told herself silence was love. I let myself cry this time, not quietly, out loud, messy, ugly, because holding it in had almost cost me everything. The first week alone was strange. I didn't rush to change things. I didn't redecorate or rearrange. I wanted to feel the house as it was, stripped of performance. I worked my shifts at the clinic, came home, cooked simple meals, and sat with my thoughts. That's when the memories started coming back. Not the big ones, the small ones. The way my son-in-law used to correct me in front of people and laugh like it was a joke. The way my daughter would avoid eye contact when he did it. The way I'd swallow my response because I didn't want to cause a scene. I'd spent years protecting a harmony that only benefited them. That realization burned. My daughter didn't call at first. Every day I told myself it was okay. Every day I checked my phone anyway. I won't lie about that part. No matter how strong you are, a mother's heart doesn't shut off just because someone hurt you. But I didn't chase. That was new. Instead, I asked myself a question that changed everything. If she never calls, who am I anyway? The answer surprised me. I was still Mabel, still capable, still alive. That thought steadied me. When she finally did call, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Not angry, just tired. "I don't know where to go," she said. I closed my eyes. "For now," I replied, "you just breathe." She came over a few days later, alone. No announcement, no warning, just her standing on the porch, hands shoved into her jacket pockets like she didn't know what version of me she was going to get. I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around the living room like she'd never really seen it before. "It feels different," she said. "It is," I answered. "So am I." She sat down, knees drawn up, eyes red. "He says you turned me against him," she whispered. I sat across from her. "No," I said firmly. "I showed you who he was. What you do with that is your choice." She cried then, deep, shuddering sobs that scared me a little. I didn't rush to comfort her. I let her feel it, because growth hurts. That afternoon, she told me things I'd suspected but never confirmed. How he monitored her spending, how he'd mocked her insecurities, how he'd convinced her I was the problem whenever she questioned him. Listening to her was like hearing my own story told in a younger voice. I felt anger rise, hot and sharp, but I kept it contained. Anger can protect you, but it can also blind you. "I should have protected you," she said. I shook my head. "You're not a child. I couldn't live your life for you, but I should have protected myself sooner." That landed hard. She nodded slowly. After she left, I sat alone and thought about how close I'd come to losing everything. Not my house, my identity. People don't realize how easy it is to disappear when you're older, how quickly your needs get labeled as inconveniences, how often your experience gets dismissed as outdated. But survival teaches you something youth never does. You don't need permission to matter. The next few weeks brought strange reactions from people around me. Some neighbors congratulated me, whispered about finally standing up to him. Others avoided the subject altogether. A few hinted I'd been harsh. I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend my decision. I'd spent too many years explaining. One afternoon at work, a younger nurse asked me how I stayed so calm. I laughed. Because chaos isn't new to me. Disrespect is. She looked confused. I didn't elaborate. Some lessons you only learn by living them. The letter from my son-in-law came on a Thursday. I knew it was from him the moment I saw the handwriting. Sharp, aggressive. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It was exactly what you'd expect. Blame dressed up as hurt. He accused me of manipulation, of poisoning my daughter, of ruining his future. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he take responsibility. I folded the letter, stood up, and dropped it in the trash. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. That night, I slept deeply for years. No dreams, no tension, just rest. When I woke up, I realized something quietly incredible. I wasn't waiting for the next blow anymore. My daughter started coming over more often, not to stay, just to talk. Sometimes we sat in silence, sometimes we laughed, sometimes we argued, but honestly, not carefully. One evening she asked, "Do you hate him?" I thought about it. "No," I said slowly. "I hate what I let myself become around him." She nodded. That answer mattered more than I realized at the time. I began changing the house, not out of spite, but intention. Painted the guest room a warm color, replaced the old couch, cleared out drawers full of things I'd been keeping just in case. Each change felt symbolic. I wasn't erasing my past, I was making space. One night, sitting alone with a glass of iced tea, I thought about the word that started it all: dead weight. I rolled it around in my mind. Dead weight doesn't move. Dead weight doesn't grow. Dead weight doesn't choose. I had done all three. There's a lie we tell older women, that strength looks like endurance, that love means tolerating disrespect, that peace comes from silence. I'd lived that lie long enough. Now I knew better. Strength looks like boundaries. Love looks like honesty. Peace looks like ownership of your life. As weeks turned into months, my daughter changed. Her voice steadied, her posture shifted. She stopped apologizing for her opinions. One day she said, "I don't think I can go back to him." I nodded. "You don't have to decide today." She smiled weakly. "I know, you taught me that." That hit me right in the chest. One evening after she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her drive away. Not relieved, hopeful. I went back inside, locked the door, and leaned against it. For the first time in years, I felt like the future wasn't closing in on me, it was opening up. At 61, people expect you to settle, to accept, to fade quietly. But here's the truth nobody likes to say out loud. Sometimes your real strength doesn't show up until someone finally underestimates you. And once you reclaim yourself, you're never invisible again. The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you realize just how loud life used to be. I sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight spilling across the floor, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch when I heard a creak or a door shut. The house wasn't empty, it was mine, finally, fully, undeniably mine. I thought about the day it all started, the day he called me dead weight. Funny how one stupid phrase can echo in your head for months, shaping the way you move, think, breathe. I remembered standing there, laundry in my arms, my heart tight like it was wrapped in steel. That word had stung, but I didn't know then that it would also become the spark that set me free. Freedom doesn't roar, it whispers first. Quietly, almost imperceptibly. You notice it only when you stop running, when you stop defending, when you stop apologizing for existing. That morning, I finally felt it. I walked through the living room, touching the back of the couch, the edges of the rug, the shelves where decades of my life were stored. I didn't want to rearrange anything. I wanted to see it all clearly, the life I had built for myself, the walls that had held laughter and tears, the rooms where I had stood quietly while others assumed they could take whatever they wanted from me. My daughter came over that day. No warning, just a text. "Can I come by?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to prepare. I just opened the door. She stood there awkwardly, holding a bouquet of flowers she'd picked from the garden next door. Her eyes were red, but there was a new light in them, a spark of life that hadn't been there when he was in the picture. She walked in and I could see the hesitation in her steps, like she wasn't sure she belonged in this space, her mother's home, now that the tension had lifted. I smiled gently. "It's yours too," I said, "but today I'm keeping the tea warm." She laughed, a little awkwardly, but the sound warmed the kitchen like it always used to. We sat down, cups clinking lightly, and she started talking about him, about everything she had kept bottled up. I listened quietly, not interrupting, not defending, not judging, just listening. It's amazing what happens when you let someone speak without trying to fix them, how the truth spills out of them like water through a broken dam. "She made me feel like I was wrong for existing," she said at one point, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like if I just did what he said, I'd be okay. I reached across and took her hand. Some people can't handle a woman who stands tall. They need her to be small, but you're not small and you never were. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in years. I didn't realize, she admitted, I didn't realize how much he twisted everything. That's because he needed you to see it that way, not because it's true, not because it's your fault. That conversation lasted hours. We didn't just talk, we unpacked decades of manipulation, quiet oppression, and subtle erasure. I told her things she hadn't heard, how I had once swallowed my own voice to keep the peace, how I had accepted the silence when he insulted me in front of everyone, how I had walked on eggshells so long that it became my default way of breathing. And she listened. Really listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She just heard me, like I had always wanted. By the end of the evening, she looked different, lighter, braver, ready to finally reclaim herself. And that's when I realized my fight had never been just for me. It had been for her, too. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. I watched her grow stronger, see the world with fresh eyes, and stand up for herself in ways she never thought she could. And I, too, was growing. I didn't need him anymore. I didn't need his approval, his validation, or his presence. I only needed my own reflection in the mirror, the one that had been buried under years of you're too much and you're too old. And yet, there were moments when his shadow still tried to creep in. Occasionally, a message would come through, carefully worded, apologetic, manipulative. Sometimes it was an email, sometimes a call, always the same energy. He'd say, "I hope we can still be adults," and I would read it, and then I would delete it. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that some people don't deserve a seat at your table, not even virtually. Some people only ever deserve your distance. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. I wasn't planning it. I wasn't looking for it. It happened at a family gathering, a casual one, just relatives and neighbors, no drama planned. And there he was, smiling too wide, confident, charming, until he slipped. He started talking casually about his plans, about moving forward, about life without me being so sensitive. I stopped mid-step, looked at him, and then I spoke, slowly, clearly, for the first time in front of everyone. Not angry, not defensive, not apologetic, just speaking. "I called you dead weight," I said, voice calm but firm. "You thought I didn't hear it. You thought it wouldn't matter, but I did hear it, and I've been living with it and with myself ever since." The room went silent. My daughter froze. The neighbor's eyebrows shot up, and I kept going. I had rehearsed it in my head for years, but now it flowed naturally, like truth finally breaking free. "You wanted me to disappear so your control would feel comfortable. You wanted my life to bend around your desires, but I didn't, and I won't. Not now, not ever." He turned red, fumbling for words, realizing too late that the version of me he thought he knew was gone. The quiet, apologetic woman who would bend, shrink, and swallow her feelings for his comfort no longer existed. My daughter looked at me, tears welling up. "Mom, you—" She couldn't finish. I smiled softly. "I'm still here," I said. "I've always been here, and I'm done being anyone's background character." From that day forward, the power shifted quietly but unmistakably. My daughter and I stopped being victims of circumstance. He stopped trying to manipulate, to charm, to rewrite history. And even though we didn't need him to acknowledge it, he knew the tables had turned. The house became a sanctuary again. I redecorated, not extravagantly, but meaningfully. Each object, each picture, each corner reflected me, my choices, my victories, my survival. I planted flowers in the yard, not because anyone would see them, but because I wanted to see them every morning. A quiet declaration: life continues, growth is possible, beauty belongs to those who cultivate it. And then came the day I finally understood what it all meant. I was sitting in my chair by the window, tea in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The world moved on outside, unaware of the battles fought within these walls. But I knew. I knew that every insult, every slight, every whispered word meant nothing against the truth I had built with my own two hands. I wasn't dead weight. I wasn't small. I wasn't invisible. I was Mabel, strong, unshakable, free. I realized then that life doesn't hand you victories with fanfare. It hands them to you quietly, in moments when you're not looking, when you're not performing, when you finally stand still enough to see what you've earned. I thought about the people who tried to define me, who tried to shrink me, who tried to erase me. I thought about every sleepless night, every apology I had given that wasn't mine to give, every tear shed in silence, and I forgave myself. Not for them, not for him, but for me. I forgave myself for being human, for being patient too long, for loving too much, for finally choosing me. And that's when I knew my story didn't end with his insult. It didn't end with my daughter's confusion. It didn't end with the empty rooms. My story ended with me standing in the center of it all, whole, powerful, untouchable. A woman who had been called dead weight, who had been underestimated, who had been silenced, and had risen anyway. So here I am, 61 years old, sitting in my home, watching the sunset across the yard I've nurtured, the walls I've protected, the life I've claimed. And I say it loud enough for anyone listening to hear. I am not dead weight. I am not invisible. I am not less than. I am Mabel. I survived. I chose myself, and I will never apologize for it again.